my trees, just so you know. So I have about 5 trees. Where's yours here? See it? John Jacob. Yeah, Coleman, that family tree. But I have Hilda Elise Thomas, daughter Dallin. John Jacob Thompson, my grandfather. John Jacob Thompson is number 3. And another one, number 2. But notice the number of people I've chased down. 250 new hymns, 129 people. 130. So I have histories going back in Norway of your family to 1500, 1550. And one of the reasons why is in Norway, they tried to starve Norway out. So when Sweden was powerful and other countries wanted to attack, they starved them because it's far north. And so the farm in Norway is so important that your last name is the name of your farm. So if you live on Dallin, where our ancestors came, your last name was Dallin. If you move to Eggville, you can change your name to Eggville if you want, or keep it at Dallin. Where the farm is critical because people could be starved. So a farm that produces, now if you go there today, you see these 1.5-acre farms. That's not very big. And they see a big John Deere tractor there because the government subsidizes anybody who's willing to grow anything for the same reason. They're still afraid they might get starved sometime. So it's an amazing place. So your great-grandfather's name, my father is Alfred Thompson. His father is John Jacob Thompson. And now John Jacob Thompson. And your name isn't Thompson. That's wrong. His father was named Thomas. And it should have been Thomason.
Yeah, he's the son of Thomas.
And it's S-E-N over there and S-O-N here. But they take liberties when you come in through Ellis Island or wherever you came in through. Sounds like this. Okay, write it down. That's who you are. And that's what they did. So the farm where your great-grandfather is still there. I've been there, spent time there. The last time we went, Jane and I lived in the cottage. Your grandfather, with 11 other children, was born. It's not very big. The downstairs, maybe the size of this room, maybe.
Well, you're their grandfather, so it'd have to be their great-grandfather.
It'd be their great-grandfather. Great-great-grandfather. Yeah, it would be.
2 greats.
Mm-hmm. Okay, all my stuff. So here, I showed you what yours looked like, Coleman family.
Thank you for doing all that work. Yeah.
Okay, well, I got into it, really enjoyed it, but I was really frustrated about Joe, let me tell you.
I know. Yeah.
Now, I have a whole lot of other family. For instance, Helen Brown, here you are, but you notice there's whole lots more of this here. If you start doing, now notice it has all of the sisters. If you go in here, for instance, you can find every one of your Vicky's sisters and brothers listed in here. Mm-hmm. Just goes on, and I can't squeeze it together. And I do all of my work on a big computer, so I'm not familiar with this using very much. There you go. All right.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that a lot of my father's siblings have passed away because together they might have been able to remember something. But
I think we could still get it if somebody wants to chase it. You have to decide whether it's worth it or not. All right.
Now, do you think when they do the saliva thing that's
that doesn't tell you? It tells you. I did one on me.
Mm-hmm. We've got one for our dad for my dad for his birthday. So.
Well, it tells you the places where your background came from, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did it show Ireland or did it show something else?
I don't know if he's still waiting for the results.
Yeah, we haven't seen it yet.
Boy, I'd like to see that. Because there's a type there. There's a name for a type that tells you a whole lot. It's a whole group of people that have the same sort of genetics. And it tells you a whole lot about, we all came out of Africa at one time or another.
Yeah, Karen did ours. And she said it was a lot of North African stuff.
Now, if you go back enough time. But if you go back in the 1500s or 1000, you're in Europe, we went back and we're going to show a lot of, some in Norway, the Scandinavian places, a lot in Normandy and France, and some in Ireland. Because it's, so they sort of get mixed together. People weren't, it wasn't nice and clean. People got married or didn't get married and moved around by chance, and lots of slaves and all that sort of stuff. Not nice and clean unless you were wealthy. So I did one too. So I'd be interested in yours. You did one on you?
No, Karen did one. I asked her to send it to me. I guess I should email her and say, where is it? Cause
Karen Thompson?
Yeah, she'll be the same as mine, pretty much. She'll be pretty
No,
close.
she might have been on general. See, you can do a general one, but a woman can do an mtDNA, and that traces not the DNA, but the mitochondria, part of the DNA, and it goes back just the female side. And that gets you a whole different set of data.
Yeah. Wow.
If you're really interested, an interesting take for you, maybe even more on a Sunday, there's a park in not Gloucester. What's the place north of Gloucester? Rockport, thank you. And there is a big quarry there where they took out granite forever. It's huge, big hole in the ground, pool in it, green blue water. And it's a state park. So you go there, but there's a state, I don't know what you call him, trooper or whatever, but a person who deals with all the park, and it's a knowledgeable person, and he gives a great lecture. And what he'll tell you is, if you go and check the genealogy of the people in Gloucester and Rockport, you'll find that they were there before Columbus discovered America. And they can check that by going, that when they do the mtDNA, the female side, they can go, it changes so much for each generation. So they know what it was like in the 1500s. They can dig up somebody in the 1500s and they got it, right? But then they can see how much it changes, and so they can tell how far back people came over, or how far back the history of the people that lived there. They know people were coming from Portugal to Gloucester well before Columbus ever got here. And the answer gets real simple. People in those days, just like the Norsemen, your ancestors, they could sail, everybody could sail east and west because it was easy. You just kept the sun the right amount above the horizon. You had to adjust it a little bit for the season and the day, you know. But you could sail east and west just by keeping the sun above the horizon a certain amount. You knew how far north you were or something. And it was easy. What they couldn't do is they couldn't go north and south. But if you look on a map, what do you find when you come due west from Portugal? Gloucester. So they found these rich fishing. The Georges Bank is one of the richest fishing places in the world. If you're going out on a wheelboat, that's where you go. And it's actually at the top of a mountain. So it's like a mile down, but it's still the top of a mountain in the floor sea, and it's flat on top. And so all this cold water from the north comes running down here, and it gets to this subsea mountain, and it comes up and over it, and it's loaded with nutrients, all sorts of minerals, and it's a great place for plankton to live and all this stuff to live, the smallest stuff, which means it's great for the big stuff. And when you go for the whales, what are the whales doing? The whales are coming here and they're diving down, and right down at the bottom, feeding on all of this stuff from the cold water, all along the top, because it's now high enough so that everybody can reach it, and it even can get some light down there. There are these worms. These worms that eat on other stuff. I don't know if they're worms or what, but they look like worms. There might be fish looking like worms. But they're like 60% fat. And so these whales go down and open their mouth and swim through this. And they pick up 500 pounds or 1,000 pounds of these worms, which are all nutrients. Because the whales, of course, go to spawn all the way down towards South America. And they don't eat. They don't eat from the time they leave here till they come back. So they go down, they spawn, they nurse a baby calf, and they come back and they're starving. But they're back there to feed. And so it's the richest fish ground around. If there's all these things, think of all the kinds of fish that are there. Lovely fish. And so what made Essex the place in the world, 1 or 2 years, Essex produced more schooners than any other port in the whole world. Because your schooners were all going out. You could story about there, and they said the fish were like jumping out of the water into the boat. They thought the fishing was so easy. True story. And so you go to Essex and there's a museum there, and you can go and check it out. It's fun. We brought Andrew's daughter there one time for a trip. It was kind of fun. But I guess the point I was trying to say, it's all connected. This is a history that you're connected to. The Norwegian came over in 1000. They may be of earliest, but maybe the Portuguese were here before that. Nobody ever bothered to check. Who knows? It surely wasn't Columbus.
He got the recognition, though.
Yeah.
Yes, he did. He was not a nice guy.
No.
All right, questions on history that you maybe, I don't want to gather this on. I've gone a long time already. And I've got lots of stories, and so I don't know if any were, but you look like you're running down.
Well, Theo was tired to start with.
What? Yeah.
So, Maya, you got any questions? Pepe stories? Ask him questions about his history. She looks at me like, what are you talking about?
I'll give you a story that's different, very different from what you expect.
I'm going to sit over there.
Yeah, okay. How do I say this? My family's different. Your grandfather, this would be my father. So your great-grandfather would be very different. So when I was born, 1935, my father I told you he'd gone away and did all these roustabout things. He was a very handsome, very charming man. My dad had a drinking problem, and he cheated on my mother a couple of times. That was real bad. But he was also sort of the family and the neighborhood counselor. When people are in trouble, their relations were in trouble, their marriages were in trouble, people came to my father. So I remember when I was working at G right after I graduated, my mother and my father went down the Lynn to talk to my aunt and uncle, my mother's sister and husband, and he had a serious drinking problem, and it was coming all apart. And who did they call to counsel? My father. But it wasn't very atypical at all. He was an interpersonal guy. He liked people. He was caring about them. He had good language. Third grade education, maybe. His father died or left, and he and his older brother quit to take care of the farm. But he was a very different kind of guy from what you would expect. I told you he fought in the circuses. He's fast. But my life was not normal. When I was growing up, I'll tell you an incident. It's like my mother was her father came down, and maybe when he was young, just after birth or just before birth. That's my Pepe. 3 people in my life: my grandfather, Pepe, my mother, and my father. The pretty big names. Okay, but I was the first grandchild. So though we were poor, my Pepe gave me things that nobody was ever going to have. And my father, because he was so different from everybody in the world, gave me things that nobody was ever going to have. My grandfather, when I went to the 1st grade or 2nd grade, I had a brand new 2-wheel bike. Kids didn't have that then. My grandfather provided it. School was a mile away. I walked. There was no bus. All that. So I was cat's meow. All right. I worked with my grandfather. Now he worked hard. And my grandfather, who was 1st generation immigrant, so my mother's 2nd generation, I'm an immigrant. My Norwegian grandfather came. So he was the immigrant. My father was the 1st generation here, and I'm the 2nd generation. On 3 sides, I'm an immigrant, 1st, 2nd, or 3rd generation, relatively young. So let me tell you about my grandfather. He treated me special, and he provided something that my father didn't provide. He was gone or different, or even when I went with him, it was different. I lived in a lot of bars. You know, the bar is a pure joint. I spent a lot of time in bars with my father. A whole lot of stories there. But anyway, my grandfather, I worked with him. He always sent me to work with him, sometimes with my father. But my grandfather worked the hell out of me. So when I was pretty young, junior high, one summer, he contracted to clean a school. In those days, there were no school janitors working the summer. So we went in and we washed every desk and every counter. And I worked with him. And so I had all these jobs. And then when he's got a contract to build this big 3-car fancy garage, like a house, for the doctor, a little ways away. I'm working with him. One day, truck pulls up, big truck, dumps. I think it's 5 yards, but it might have been 7 yards of gravel. And then another truck pulls up and dumps 7 yards of gravel on this flat. And I said, "What's all that for, Pepe?" He said, I go, Pepe is French for grandfather, right? And so he says, "It's going to be the base. We're going to put a concrete bottom in this garage, and we got to put something on it so with the water and the dirt underneath might move, and we need to fix it so the concrete doesn't crack. And I said, I said, well, how come you put it in there? Oh, he said, it has to be spread. And I said, that's a lot of dirt. He said, yeah, I guess about 45 tons. And I said, that's a lot of dirt, Pepe. Dirt. He said, yeah, it is, and you're going to move it. He said, the wheelbarrow's here and the shovel's here. Start now. It's 8 o'clock in the morning, and I expect you're going to be done today. So he had really high expectations. So I worked my friend's little butt off. I could walk home. It's like less than a quarter of a mile. I went home. I ate a sandwich. I flopped on the floor and slept for a half hour of my 1 hour lunch because Pepe took a 1 hour lunch. And I went back and I dug more stuff. All right? And I moved that damn pile. All right? I thought, now, is this a good thing or bad thing? Anyway, I was proud of it. Obviously, I remember it. I'll tell you that. So that's the story there. Now, there's another part of that, though. He kept giving me jobs. And so I learned a lot. He was a hell of a carpenter. And Pepe was a man that came as a poor immigrant. But he was upper middle class by the time he was in the paper all the time. I had clippings out there. He bought buildings. He'd buy a building, it's emptied out, it's in the 40s. Whoever was there didn't live there. And he'd buy a building, walk into the bank, take a loan, whatever it cost to buy this big building, 4 stories or 3 stories. No contract, handshake. Then he's going to remodel it for apartments or for the doctor. We did one for a doctor. And he'd do all the carpentry and some of the plumbing. And sometimes he might hire somebody. He did most things. So he's buying buildings. He's a big deal. But he never paid any interest and he didn't pay off the mortgage. He only paid the interest. Then when he got to the end of the project, he'd sell the building, get the money, walk into the bank, here's the principal, pay it off, and go find another building. But he'd buy a whole block. He had a block that didn't reach all the way across this pond, but went halfway across this pond. And it was 2-story building, brick, ran all along the top of the canal. It was a bridge, and across were all the mills, where all the Canadians came down to work in the mills. Everybody, no work in Canada. They all came down. Half the town was French. We had 3 big Catholic churches, a giant French Catholic, a giant English, and a giant Polish Catholic. They're big. Now comes the kicker. I'm poor. My dad's not doing well by the 40s, another story. And Pepe said, would you like me to use my car? And he said, well, come on, I'm going to go buy a car. And he said, what are you doing? And he said, well, I like a new car. And he said, well, what does that mean? And he said, well, I like to have a new car before anybody else has a new car. So he said, now every year in those days, on September, a certain date, like it might be the 5th or whatever, it was the first weekend, all the car dealers, every car dealer in town would put their best cars in the window and they'd have an open house and a big sale. Pepe would go in the Wednesday and Thursday before the big sale came. He wanted the best one that was going to go there. And he'd negotiate. And he'd walk out with a car that was loaded with every damn goodie you can imagine. Well, by the time I got to be 16, I had a license. He says, you want to use the car? And I said, Pepe, it's a brand new. It's like a Cadillac. A brand new car. And he said, well, the rules are simple. You got to leave it with more gas than you put in it. You know I go for coffee every morning at 5:45 with my friends. It has to be in the garage by 5:45 Monday morning. And I'm done with it Friday afternoon at 5. So I was the only person, this poor kid, our family, during some of that time, our family only had a pickup truck with no doors. And it had no doors because my father at that time was a garbage man. And our garbage truck had no doors because you got in and out so often. Another story. I worked at that, hard story. But anyway, Pepe gave me that car for weekends. So nobody had a newer car or a better car. Back, I'm in high school and I got automatic dimmers and every other damn thing. Courtesy of my Pepe. So he was the one that sort of offset the lower class of my father. My father's family was not middle class, low class probably. Two of his sisters made it pretty well, upper middle. But my father had a sister that was real trouble, law and all sorts of stuff. So it wasn't all easy. we were never on welfare. But there were hard times. My dad got hurt a lot because he did wild jobs. And so, like that one pulling that thing out of the water, there were other jobs like that. I mean, he did crazy things. But I had my grandfather, that was stabilized. I had my mother. And my grandfather and my mother were, my mother's family would have been, my grandfather's would have been high middle or maybe lower upper because of his stuff with his buildings and all that stuff. That was an influence. My mother, of course, was pulled down by the family of my father in terms of class values. Because he was sort of a wild man. He was real honest, though. He was so honest that it was a problem. It's a problem because he got jobs when, I don't know how, I'm not going to tell you that story.
Oh, now you're
Why not?
They're
all 18 or over.
Yeah? It's a long story. You don't want to know it.
Sure we do.
Sure we do. Good story. Good story for you. Let me tell you, my dad was an iceman. He wasn't a good businessman. It was a respected job. So you delivered ice all over town. Rick gave me a set of tongs. I gave him one set back. I got another. All right? An iceman got ice. They cut it off the river with horses and trucks. They were early on, were trucks. No doors on the trucks. That's another story. Why no doors on the trucks for harvesting the ice in the river? Because sometimes you found a hot and bad place and the ice and the truck went through the river, went down through the ice, and you either got out or you drowned with the truck. All right? So, anyway, he did that. He worked nights on an ice plant. But what happened after World War II? After World War II, you started to see these refrigerators with the things on the top, and they weren't ice boxes anymore. They were actual refrigerators. You didn't need to put ice in them. Nobody ever heard of that. Even the bars stopped buying ice from my father. So the job went away. But what happened that offset that is this is in 1945, the war ends, but there are no cars. In 1940, the war breaks out in 41. We see it coming in 41. Everybody who makes cars, General Motors, Ford, everybody makes cars, stops making cars. The government says you can't make any more cars. We don't want you making cars. We're at war. We may not survive. You only make what we tell you. You're going to make tanks. You're going to make Jeeps, and you're going to make deuce and a half trucks for the war. Or you're going to make airplanes. No car. So anybody who's got a car, what are they doing? From 1940 to end of the war, 45, you got a car, you take care of everything. You get a fine to replace, even if you have to wait a week or a month, because you can't lose the car because there's no others around. Population getting a little bigger, more need for them, but they're none. So everybody takes care of all these cars. Most of them, all of them are standard ship. Comes 1946, they're late 46. There start to be cars, and the government's let up. Ford, General Motors are now making cars, and people are buying them before there are any cars. So you go and you buy it, not a sight unseen, because they're going to build it. Everybody wants a car. You're driving. We were driving a 1937 Terraplane. I don't know what the hell that is, but that's what it was. And they were pretty ugly.
Terraplane?
Terraplane, that's what it's called. Huh? I think it was a Hudson. They don't make those anymore. But anyway, that's what we drove. So now they're making new cars. So all over town and all over the area are all these cars that are great. There are no scratches. They shift well. The starter, everything works perfect. But nobody wants them. Everybody wants a new car. So they're parked in the backyard. What does my dad do? He goes to these places where he sees his old car parked there and says, I'll give you $15 for the car. And they say, okay, I didn't think I was going to get any for it. He drives it home. No license, no number plate, no nothing. He drives it home because the license and the number plate, they're all on the new car. Right? And way out back of our house, there's sort of a field. And he says, all right, we're gonna turn these into scrap and bring them to the junk dealer. The first thing you do, these are old cars, pre-war cars, so there's no plastic. There's horsehair, and there's leather on the tops, you know. The door handles are molded aluminum. He said the first thing you do, you got to get rid of all that crap, because we want the iron and the metal, especially the copper and the brass. He said, turn it over. Okay, let's turn, how? He said, you hook the winch on the truck, same kind of truck, put it over the top, you hook it through the window, and you run the truck forward, and you turn it over on the side. Then you go ahead and you take a crowbar, a big bar, not a crowbar, 5-foot bar, and you drive it into the gas tank several times, because if you don't, it blows up, and it's bad. All right? And if there's a lot of gas in it, just mostly burns, it goes poof and burns. But if there's only fumes and a little gas in it, it goes boom, lifts everything off the ground. So I'd say, okay. So after a little while, I'm going into high school, I can do this. So I turn it over and burn it, set it on fire, and all the horsehair and all the plastic, everything.
Is Ronnie with you too?
No, he's 4 years younger. So in all this, he's like late elementary, and so no. So, but then he's teaching me to cut. So I'm cutting with an acetylene torch. It's quite an experience. This stuff, if you cut over your head, I still have my marks on the top of my thing. These melted metal, when you cut over your head from the cutting, falls down, of course. But if you got shoes on, it falls in your shoes, and it's so hot, white hot. And of course, it burns a hole. It settles like in your flesh, So you're really careful. Try not to do that. You lean over a little. But anyway, you pull it over, and then you take a torch and you cut it up, and you cut the motor out of it. And after you got all the stuff done, the radiator is vacuumed, and then you load it all in a truck and you take it to Blasburg. So we always had a bunch of these cars sitting out in back. I said, Dad, I want to run one. He said, okay. So he saw me do it a little bit. So I'm running around out there. There's a lot of trees, pine trees, and it's filled from a canal. So there's these big boulders. It looks like it's flat, and then you'll find a hole 5 feet deep because there's, all the boulders. So anyway, I'm experimenting with the cars. He said, a couple of rules. I had no rules growing up. Your family probably has told you don't do this. My family never told me a thing after I got middle school. Never told me. My mom told me, Dick, remember this. You're not better than anybody else. You remember that. You are not better than anybody else around here. But you're as good as anybody else, and you need to remember that part too. One rule I got, okay? And then I was going to be a priest. So I'm really straight arrow, No drinking. Sex is unheard of. Even thinking sex is dirty, and I have to confess it. True story. All right? So I'm real straight. So anyway, I'm out there with the cars, and I'm starting to move them around. This is fun. No rules, no road. And after a little while, I think, can I go through that tree? Hit it! Well, yeah. After enough times, I know I can go through a hardwood tree about that big. But I can go through a pine tree about that big if I'm going fast enough.
Hey, right? Rick, that's where you're coming from.
Now, it wrecks the hell out of the car, but after I've done it enough times, if the car won't run anymore, I go get the truck, hook the winch to it, tow it back, and cut it up the next day and take another one. All right? So I've got a real thing going here. And Dad says, sees me doing it. He says, all right, rules. I don't get rules. So that's why I diverged on that one rule. So he says, I want you to crank all the windows down. You can't run the car without windows down. And he says, these are plate glass windows. The only part that was not plate glass in those days, that was laminated with plastic so it doesn't crack into big pieces and cut your head off, was the front windshield. All of the window is now, so you notice how they break, they cave in, but the glass holds together because they're laminated and there's this plastic in between. Not in those days, only the front. And he said, and the second thing is lock. Of course, there's no safety belts or any of that stuff. And the steering wheels all have this big thing that sticks out in the front of it. It makes it look good, but of course it impales you when you hit anything. Yeah. It's true. It took him a while to figure that out. And so the long and the short is, he says you got to put a chain around the doors because the locks don't hold for crap. So you had to wrap a chain around the doors and just leave it inside. So the doors couldn't fly out as you're going around to a tree somewhere, and you fall out. He doesn't want me to get hurt. And the last rule is you can't go first or second gear, only no high gear. Well, that's all right. I can do 50 in second gear on those cars, or 45. And I'm in trees. All right? I'm in trees anyway. I don't know how many cars I went through trees. Well, I went through a lot of cars because I take them back, burn them.
Come on, Dad. We should do these.
It was the end of the war. I was brought up with all the war movies, and people talked about Molotov cocktails. You know what those are? It's a bottle. Glass bottle, they fill it with gasoline and they tie a rag to it. I thought, what those are? I wonder what I could do with those. So I make a bottle of gasoline and I set it in the glove compartment of a car I'm going to burn. And then I run a little ways and I stand back and the car goes whoop up in the air and back down. And I think, yeah, I think those work. So I'm back still with the cars. And anyway, I think it's a lot of fun. And I invite my friend Ernie Lejemunier, a Frenchman from my elementary school or middle school now.
Say that name again.
Lejemunier. Lejemunier.
For posterity.
And I invite him to come for a ride. Well, it didn't turn out all that well. Nobody else is running cars all over hell. But we're going to go out, and I'm showing off. Got to be showing off. I don't remember, but I got to be showing off from what kid wouldn't be. And he's there, and there's no belts, there's nothing, just the chains on the doors, my glass down. And so we're busting through the trees, and it's what's the problem? If I run into another tree, I take the car back and get another one, right? And then I cut it up. But we come into this circle, and I'm accelerated, and there's a big round circle of trees, of bushes. You can't tell where the tree is. You just see bushes, just green. I don't know where the heck it is. So I pick a spot that looks likely, and I step on the gas even further, and we get to it, and we go whack, just like that. And I think, what just happened? And I look over at Ernie, put a bang on the head and a little blood. I said, you all right? Yeah, I think so. All right, let's go see what happened. He said, I can't open the door. Take the chain. I can't open the door. We can't open either door. What's happened? I crawl and I look outside the door, and the front tire that's supposed to be up there is right beside the door. So is his, too. So the door, well, what I did is told you it was all fill there and rough. It turns out there's a nice dirt, and there's a place where they had these big rocks from the canal they filled in there. And there's a place about yay wide, wider than the car. And when I was going over it, the whole front end dropped in that hole, right? But I'm going probably 40 at the time or 35. And it just tears the whole front end of the car and everything all out, brings it back beside the doors, and we can't get out. So we crawl out through the window and go get the truck.
So that was the new adventure. It wasn't trees anymore that time.
It wasn't trees, it was a hole in the ground. True story.
What was next? A rock?
Unbelievable. So my growing up
like you, Dad.
Well, I did it differently, but Dad doesn't even know half the stories.
No, that's true. I don't know half this story.
But we both have in our history a lot of wrecked cars.
Oh my.
Well,
does he want to know the
Did
stories?
he tell you about wrecking my mother's car?
Yes.
You did tell them.
They may not remember it, but...
Yeah. My mother had...
2 weeks after I got my license.
Yes. Jane and I go away for, I don't know, it was a weekend, it was a conference. And my mother comes up to sit with the two boys. I don't remember where Andrew was. She was
I
there
think she was there too, yeah.
Yeah. I don't think anybody else was, though. I think all the girls were gone. Just Derek.
Yeah.
So my mother comes, but my mom, she's like 60, safest driver you ever saw. And she's got a Dodge Charger with a huge Hemi engine, you know? How she got it, I don't know.
Beautiful sports car.
Beautiful. It would fly fast. And my mom would never do faster than any speed limit.
Right.
Maybe not that
Big
fast.
8-cylinder
And I said,
engine.
whatever you do, Mom, you can't let him use the car. It's not safe. So we come back, and there's my mom sitting there, hit down. Turns out, Rick talked her into using the car, took it out.
Steve did.
Huh?
Steve talked her into me bringing him to a basketball game.
I see. Anyway, it's only like 2 miles away from the house, and he rolls it over. Rolls the son of a bitch over and totals it.
That nice car.
There was a whole reason for that, but
There was a good reason for
I
that?
gave him the whole story.
Give him the whole story.
You don't remember you remember the bad parts, but
Well, there's some car coming to it. There was this story about a cat running across the road or something. Or
no. Well, so I learned how to drive on your car, which
Yes.
was the Rabbit, which is a manual brakes,
Yeah.
and her car had automatic brakes, had power brakes, and back then some did, some don't. Now everything is power now, right? But
Yeah.
so your brakes, you had to push pretty firm to get it to stop. You had to put some pressure on it. Whereas hers, if you touched it, the power assist made it pretty quick response. And I was driving up around this corner, and I wasn't really going that fast. I wasn't flying because I hadn't learned that yet. But I was coming around. A corner, and it had just started raining, which means the roads are like the worst they could be. I come around a corner, and there's somebody stopped in the road. They're delivering papers. They stop to throw a paper out, and I come around the corner, and I stomp on the brakes. Again, not realizing that how it's going to lock up. The brake's locked up, so I'm trying to steer out of this lockup. I steer away from the car I'm going to hit, and I go up on this embankment, and the car flips up and rolls and lands on its side. And Steve, with his friend on one side and me on the other side, Steve crushes his friend, who had, I think he might have broken a finger, at least hurt it pretty bad, because I remember we get out, we're all like, okay, except for the kids going, yeah, that hurts a lot. Because Steve landed on top of him. Steve was always solid. So.
Solid kid.
But then the cops come and they tow the car back, so we end up coming back to the house, and there's Grammy sitting in the window looking out the window as we pull up in the cop's car.
Oh, jeez. She's probably going, oh my God, what have I done?
So she knew she was in big trouble at that point.
She really was shook up, and I was really unhappy with her for letting you do it. Jeez. I got one more story for you. Well, I got a whole lot. I can tell you a tenth of them. But one more story that's interesting because it's your heritage, okay? You have a great, I don't know how many greats, grandmother who is a daughter of the king. That's a term to remember. Daughter of the king, okay? Around in the 1600s, that was the French century. I don't know if you know that, how your history is. But the Sun Kings were the powerful group in the whole world, France, all right? And so, it's the 14th, 15th, and 16th.
Louis. On
TV, you see the thing. And it was settling in the United States, and the colonies at the time, 1600s. And the French king looked around, and he said, look what's happened over there. The English have got colonists. They're having families, they're shipping more people over. They're building farms. What have I got in Canada? I got more land, but I got trappers, fur traders, and I got what? Fishermen. Nothing else. No women. There's nothing good. Just a little while, they're going to have enough people, and they're going to want Canada. They're going to take it. They're going to do something. He said, "All right, I'm going to do this. I'm going to put some money up. And we're going to find women all over France who live in these little villages of good moral character. I don't know if they had to read because most people didn't read. And they got to be a little bit adventurous because I'm going to give them money for three things. I'm going to give them money for clothing. I'm going to give them money for transportation. And then I'm going to give them some sort of emergency money. And if they're willing to do this, I'm going to put them on a boat. And we're going to take them to Quebec. And there they'll be men, and then we'll have families, and then we'll start to settle all of Canada, and so we'll stabilize the country. And so anyway, there was this woman in a little village in France. I know where it is. Genulac, I think I mispronounced it, but that's what it's named. And it's down in the sort of southwest a little bit of France. Village is still there. Half a dozen houses at an intersection of two roads, and there was a woman there. Your grandmother, and she opted in, and went in the whole thing, got the clothing, got on a long boat trip, and went there. Now comes the thing: how do you find a husband? Who gets to pick, and why when you don't know anybody, and we're not waiting around, and they want kids, right? So whoever's in charge has an interesting method. The women draw lots, and the men draw lots. And the first woman comes out, and the first man goes up. And the women, then they announce the rules. And the rules are, the man has 3 days to convince the woman to marry him. If the woman doesn't like him, he's off to the end of the line, and she goes back and gets another choice. But it's the woman's choice. Mm-hmm. 3 days to woo and whatever, however they're maids from these little villages, and these guys are tough old trappers with no women around at all. You must have known what kind of men these are, right? But anyway, your grandmother was one of the daughters of the king. Who did that?
So not grandmother.
Like great.
It's like 1640.
Yeah, okay.
So it goes back a long way,
yeah.
But it's nevertheless true. And it's true. So that was the start of one. We have two French lines coming to you. My grandfather and my grandmother. And the grandfather's pretty famous. His name's Saint Germain, and that's a big name, like the main avenue and one of the main avenues in Paris is Avenue Saint-Germain. So it was Count de Saint-Germain. And so he was a high muckety muck originally, you know, 20 generations later, who knows. But it was a big name. So Saint-Germain was a powerful family name, and it's spread all over Paris when you go there. You see it. So that's one. I don't know about the other. The other French connection, a woman, goes down from Canada, and all I know about them is that a member of that family, a man, was in the Federal Navy during the Civil War. So you have a grandfather, great, who fought in the Civil War in the Northern Navy. And then you have my father, the Norwegian guy.
Do you have that history mapped out or no?
Yeah, most of it. I have a lot in Norway, and I have some here. Supposedly, I have the one for the French, but it was done before computers, and so I'm not sure it's correct. And I haven't turned my attention to it. I might now that I've got it interested enough and worked on this hard enough.
Get a little practice.
I think I know. Yeah, I think I know a little something. And I'll try. So you have an interesting background. Mostly French, one Norwegian, but the Norwegian was. There'd be no background unless they were sort of semi-royalty. They had a farm or two. And I have a second cousin there. So I know the second cousin. Looks a little like you, blonde hair. She's nice. I liked her a lot.
So you were saying something about in Norway, there's heritage that was priests and heritage that were burned as witches. So
there's an island in Farsund Harbor. We come from southern Norway. It's almost the furthest south you can go in Norway. So they swim in the summer. They don't have a lot of snow. You think of winters are cold. When we were there, our second trip, we got some taxi car driver. It's a whole other story how we found all these people. It was just an amazing story. But anyway, we got a taxi driver who was going to help us. He was got on the radio. In those days, the taxis had a radio, and they was calling around anybody named Thompson or something like that. And he said he bought a plow 3 years ago because he was going to add some money to his taxi. He didn't make his money for his truck. And turned out it hadn't snowed in 3 years enough to plow. So it's a misnomer about how cold. This is real southern Norway. Real northern Norway is a whole different story. I think you know that Norway wraps all the way around top of Sweden and back down into Russia. Norway's so long that if you stick a pin in Oslo and you spin Norway around, it goes down past Italy. It's a long, skinny country that wraps all around with all these fjords. I'll send you pictures of fjords. There are places in Norway that we've been on a trip where you can stand in a parking lot. We did. I remember Steve saying this. Steve went to Norway with us. We're in a parking lot. Gravel and dirt. Water where boats are coming in. But you'll look up and there were 5 waterfalls more than 300 feet coming off the cliffs. Beautiful in the sunlight. In a parking lot. And it's not surprising at all. It's beautiful beyond belief. So in a parking lot. So the reason I was looking at pictures the other night about something, and there was a place where we were on a fjord trip, and it was a place called the Seven Sisters, and it was 7 waterfalls pouring off this. People live up there, and it's old style on the fjords because you can't get up and down. So there's enough flat space up there, like they have an orchard and sheep and stuff, but you can't get up and down except by a rope. And it's, I don't know, one place in Norway they're 5,000 feet a mile, and it's where they jump. They used to jump off the cliffs, the skydive with the wings and stuff, and then pull the parachute stuff. We've done there, but this was.
You didn't try it though.
No picture of life. No, but there were families that lived up there, and when you got close to dying, there's no place to bury you and have the church services. So when you got close to dying, they lowered you down to a place near the water, so you could die where they could take your body away.
Well.
I thought, geez, this is a great trip, last trip. At the end of a rope.
There you go.
All right, my stories are done. More anytime you want.
Yeah, we'll have to come back for more. Yeah.
Well, hope you found some of them interesting. They're your heritage. They're not.
What'd you think of your father?
Mixed.
Yeah.
I was proud of how good he was with people. He was excellent at making people unafraid, scared women that had been beaten, or men in trouble. My dad could calm people down and say, well, let's talk about this and let's work. And he could do that. On the other hand, he had an alcohol problem. He gave it up for Lent. Ever heard of an alcoholic who gave up alcohol for Lent? My dad did. My dad didn't. He said he was a D&W Catholic. Now, my mother was quite Catholic. My siblings were not. I was. Now my siblings all are, and I'm not. It's changed. But my dad said he was a D&W Catholic. And everybody asked him, what does that mean? Death and weddings only. That's all he went to church for. Death and weddings. He hurt himself and broke a leg or back. One of the times in the hospital. He raised all sorts of hell. And I was there with him one day, and it was a Catholic hospital, and the nuns ran it, but there was a priest or two, and they were sort of top of the pecking order male. You know how that is in the Catholic Church. So anyway, the priest was out there on a ladder. He was on the second or third floor, and the priest on this tall ladder trying to get up to check out the roof. And my father's not doing all that great. Can't come home. In those days, they didn't keep you. And the window's open. It's summer. There's no fans, no air conditioning. And I was there when he yelled out the window and said, Father! Father! The guy said, yeah, Al? He says, that's as close to heaven as you're going to get! so he loved to tease, and my mom was bright, but sort of shy French Canadian. I told you about doing the floors, everything's clean. You pulled all the shades, and she would say, what would the neighbors think? You know, all that. That's the kind of woman she was. Prettiest woman in her class. Started out at just high school, and she became an accountant for the big company in town, so she was good. But when I was young, I'm going to guess junior high, they used to bring a babysitter, early junior high, late elementary, early junior high. There were a period of 3 or 4 years. And everybody came and played cards. And canasta got big, but the game was pitch. And now this was something like cards you can't imagine. I know you all play cards. I don't play cards at all. I can't keep my mind on it. It's boring.
Try to teach Laura pitch.
Okay, you saw that. You two saw that. And so anyway, people would come at 7 o'clock at night, or 8, and they'd play cards around the kitchen table, and there'd be, I don't know, 4 or 5 couples. And they'd have a babysitter for us and the other kids who happened to be alive. You know, we're like 3 or 4 years apart, 12 years between me and my sister Barbara, the youngest. And so they'd play, and it would be raucous. They'd drink some. I don't know what you'd call it, heavy. But nobody got drunk. But they drank steadily all night long. But they drank and played cards until about 6:30 in the morning. 6:15, actually. So they played all night. Then everybody'd get up, and they'd all go to church. 7 o'clock mass. True story. And they'd come back, and everybody'd have dinner. And I'd get up, and everybody's there. They're all breakfast, rather. They'd all have breakfast, and then everybody go home and spend their time. But that went on for lots of time. I'm talking years, all right? And people liked it. And my dad would annoy my mother. She'd bid 4, and he said, Al, you don't have those cards. He said, Mary, I'm going to win anyway. And, you know, and so it was pitch they played, or not much poker, but then canasta with the double decks and that sort of stuff. But, I mean, they were the center of a whole lot of social stuff. And it was my dad. They'd have Sunday parties. Now, this is a little earlier than that. Now, these are wild. So this is my dad's family, not St. Germain's. St. Germain's are middle class, or my grandfather was more than that. He's in the paper all the time. Pepe said this, and he did that, and so forth. But the Thompson Jiguer parties, our house was a big house, built by my grandfather, and moved out, and we moved in, and then later my uncle bought my father's brother. They had 12 kids. 2 died. So between the 4 in our family and the 10 downstairs, we always had teams for everything. You know, we played everything. There was a field across the way and all that sort of stuff. So other story. But the thing they did with my father's issuing and drawing the crowd stuff is they had Sunday parties during the summer, especially into the fall. And these parties would be cooking hamburgers and stuff out there. but the booze would flow through. And they might have 25 or 30. I mean, it's a big crowd, and maybe more than that was when you counted all the young teens and all that sort of stuff. So it's pretty wild. Almost always there'd be a fist fight or two. A fist fight or two. I'm not talking not quiet now. I'm talking a fist fight. There was Uncle Johnny quite often bought a young calf in early spring and raised it. So by the time, if it was in the fall, it would get to be 300-400 pounds. So it would be a pretty good sized animal. He's going to butcher it, for a freezer and that sort of stuff. But if that animal was there, if there was an animal there, and you get past Labor Day, and everybody would be trying to ride the cow, and they'd be making bets, and somebody make a pass at somebody else's wife, and then the fight's on. And I thought, I live in a circus. I did. That was my father's life. It was the other side of that. Now, I don't know that my father was in very many of those fights. Someone made a pass at my mother once at one of those card pit things, and Dad almost threw him out the window of the second floor store. And Dad wasn't big, but he was impressive, scary. All right? I mean, looks like Paul Newman. You know what Paul Newman looks like when he was younger? You two would know what Paul. That's what my dad was, a handsome guy. Handsome, mild, close, and so forth. Yeah. But physical. There you have it. I've done enough. I'm not telling any more stories tonight.